My stepsister deliberately destroyed my 7-year-old's birthday cake just to announce her third engagement. My family laughed it off, calling me an overreacting, low-ranking military clerk who couldn't afford a new one anyway. They had no idea who I really was. 3 hours later, a 4-star Admiral arrived at my house, saluted me, and completely shattered their reality. If you want to understand how a child's birthday party turned into a battlefield, you have to understand the dynamic I grew up in. My name is Sarah. I'm 34 years old, a mother to the sweetest little girl named Lily, and for the past 12 years, I have lived a double life. To the United States Navy, I am Commander Sarah Miller, an O5 serving in naval intelligence, holding a top-secret SCI clearance, and responsible for coordinating multinational security operations that I am legally forbidden to discuss. To my family, however, I am just Sarah, the glorified secretary. My mother passed away when I was 6. 2 years later, my father, Thomas, married Susan. Susan was a hurricane of a woman, loud, demanding, and fiercely protective of her own daughter, Brittany, who was exactly my age. From the moment they moved into our quiet suburban home, the hierarchy was established. Brittany was the golden child, the princess destined for greatness, and I was the inconvenient baggage from my father's first marriage. My father is a passive man. He hates conflict more than he loves justice, which meant that whenever Susan blatantly favored Brittany, he would just look away. When Brittany got a brand new car for her sweet 16, I was handed a bus pass and told it would build character. When Brittany went to a private university on my father's dime, I was told there wasn't enough money left for my tuition. But I didn't let it break me. I let it forge me. At 18, I joined the Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps, NROTC, on a full scholarship. I worked my fingers to the bone, graduated top of my class, and commissioned as an officer. The military became the family I never had. It gave me structure, respect, and a sense of purpose that Susan's psychological warfare could never touch. Because I never bragged, and because I always changed out of my uniform before visiting home, my family formed their own wildly inaccurate narrative about my career. When I mentioned I worked in a secure facility, Susan told everyone I was a filing clerk for the base supply depot. When I promoted to lieutenant, and later lieutenant commander, my father just nodded and asked if I was getting a raise, so I could finally move out of those cramped military barracks. They had no idea I owned a beautiful 4-bedroom home in a highly sought-after neighborhood, purchased with my husband, Michael, a Navy pilot who was currently deployed overseas. I let them believe their narrative. It was easier that way. Correcting them would require sharing details of my life, and I had learned long ago that anything I shared with Susan and Brittany would be weaponized against me. I preferred the quiet dignity of my silence. But silence, as I would soon learn, only emboldens toxic people. The trouble started when Lily turned 7. With Michael deployed in the Pacific, it had been a hard year for my daughter. She missed her dad terribly, and I was determined to make her 7th birthday nothing short of magical. She was obsessed with fantasy dragons, fairies, and especially unicorns. I spent weeks planning a lavish backyard garden party. I hired a local baker to create a stunning, 3-tiered unicorn cake that cost me nearly $300. I booked an entertainer, rented a massive bounce house, and transformed my backyard into a pastel wonderland. A week before the party, Lily looked at me with her big, hopeful brown eyes. "Mommy, is Grandpa coming?" My heart sank. I had strictly limited my contact with my family over the last few years to protect Lily from their toxicity. But Lily loved my father. To her, he was just Grandpa Tom, the man who occasionally snuck her hard candies and read her stories. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and invited my father. "Oh, Sarah," my dad mumbled on the phone, "Susan and Brittany are in town this weekend. I can't just leave them at the house." "They can come, Dad," I sighed, rubbing my temples. "It's a children's party. Just, please tell Brittany to keep it low-key. This is about Lily." Of course, he promised. "We'll be there at 2. I should have known better. In a family where Brittany was the sun, nobody else was allowed to shine. Not even a 7-year-old girl whose father was half a world away. The day of the party was picture perfect. The weather was a crisp 72 degrees, the sun was shining, and my backyard was filled with the joyous laughter of 20-second graders. Lily was in her element, wearing a sparkly purple dress and a homemade unicorn headband. Seeing the pure joy on her face made all the late nights of planning worth it. At 2:45 p.m., 45 minutes late, my family finally arrived. I watched from the patio as my father walked through the side gate, looking apologetic. Behind him came Susan, wearing a designer pantsuit that looked entirely out of place for a backyard kids' party. And finally, making her grand entrance, was Brittany. Brittany was 34, but acted like she was starring in her own reality TV show. She walked in wearing a skin-tight, bright red cocktail dress and oversized sunglasses, clinging to the arm of a man I didn't recognize. "Sarah!" Susan called out, her voice easily cutting through the children's laughter. She looked around my pristine, manicured backyard, taking in the caterers and the elaborate decorations. Her eyes narrowed into a judgmental squint. "Well, aren't you living beyond your means? I hope you didn't max out your credit cards for this. You know, enlisted pay isn't that great." I gritted my teeth. "I am an O5, Susan. I make more than your husband. It's budgeted, Susan. Thank you for coming." Brittany sauntered up, barely looking at me. "Hey, Sarah, this is Greg." She waved a manicured hand toward the bewildered-looking man beside her. "We have big news, but we'll wait for the right moment." "Brittany," I said, my voice dropping to a low warning register that usually made my junior officers stand at attention. "This is Lily's day. Do not make this about you." She rolled her eyes, scoffing. "Relax, Admiral. God, you military types are so stiff. We're just here to celebrate." For the next hour, Brittany did everything in her power to draw attention to herself. When the kids were watching The Hired Magician, Brittany laughed loudly at her phone and started showing Greg photos, completely distracting the children. When I served lunch, she complained loudly about the childish food, demanding to know if I had any real champagne instead of just sparkling cider. I ignored her, maintaining my composure. I was trained to handle high-stress, hostile environments. An insecure stepsister was child's play. Then came time for the cake. I brought out the 3-tiered unicorn masterpiece. It was beautiful, shimmering fondant, edible gold leaf, and a beautifully sculpted horn on top. The kids gasped in awe. Lily's eyes went as wide as saucers. I placed it carefully on the center display table under the decorated gazebo. "Okay, everyone, gather around," I called out, pulling a lighter from my pocket to light the 7 candles. My father stood near the back, smiling softly. Susan was busy inspecting her nails. Brittany and Greg were standing uncomfortably close to the cake table. As I lit the final candle and the children began to sing Happy Birthday, Brittany suddenly clapped her hands together hard. "Actually, before we sing, I have a massive announcement," Brittany shouted, cutting off a chorus of 7-year-olds. The kids stopped, confused. I froze, the lighter still in my hand. "Brittany, stop," I said sharply. "No, this is perfect. Everyone is gathered," Brittany beamed, pulling Greg forward. "Greg and I are engaged, and we're expecting a baby." She thrust her left hand into the air, showing off a massive, gaudy diamond ring. Susan shrieked with delight and rushed forward, completely shoving past 2 small children to hug her daughter. "Oh my God, my baby is having a baby," Susan wailed, practically vibrating with joy. "Dad, get over here," Brittany yelled. I looked at Lily. My sweet, beautiful daughter stood there, completely forgotten at her own party, staring at the candles on her cake, melting down onto the fondant. Her lower lip began to tremble. "Susan, Brittany, step away from the table," I commanded, my navy voice finally breaking through my polite facade. "We are finishing Lily's song. Now." Brittany whipped her head toward me, a sneer twisting her features. "Oh, shut up, Sarah. A kid turns 7 every day. This is a real milestone. We need photos." Brittany stepped backward to pose for a picture Susan was framing on her phone. She didn't even look behind her. She took one step, then another, and slammed her hip directly into the edge of the display table. It wasn't an accident. I saw her eyes flick to the table just a second before she moved. The table violently tipped. The kids screamed. I lunged forward, but I wasn't fast enough. The three-tiered unicorn cake slid off the table and crashed onto the concrete patio with a sickening splat. The beautiful golden horns snapped in half. The layers of vanilla sponge and strawberry filling were instantly destroyed, smashed into a tragic puddle of frosting and dirt. Silence fell over the yard. The only sound was the sizzling of a rogue candle extinguishing in a pile of mashed fondant. Then, Lily began to sob. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a heartbroken, soul-crushing wail. I dropped to my knees, pulling my daughter into my chest, holding her tight as she buried her face in my shoulder. My blood was roaring in my ears. The sheer disrespect, the calculated cruelty, it was blinding. "Oops," Brittany said, not sounding sorry in the least. "Well, it was just cake, and honestly, it looked a little dry anyway." "Get out," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it scared me. "What?" Susan scoffed, stepping protectively in front of Brittany. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. It was an accident, and frankly, your reaction is incredibly selfish. Your sister just announced her pregnancy, and you're throwing a fit over a piece of bread and sugar?" I said, "Get the hell out of my house." I stood up, my eyes locked on Susan. I pointed a rigid finger toward the gate. "Oh, please," Brittany rolled her eyes. "You don't even have dessert now." Luckily, I came prepared. With a sickening smirk, Brittany gestured to Greg, who walked over to their oversized tote bag and pulled out a sleek, white bakery box. He opened it and placed it on the remaining half of the table. It was a single-layer sheet cake. Written in thick blue icing were the words, "She said yes, baby has hone." She had brought her own cake to my daughter's birthday party. She had planned to hijack the event from the moment she received the invitation. "Dad," I looked at my father, begging him silently to finally, for once in his life, step up and defend me, defend his granddaughter. My father looked at the smashed unicorn cake, then at Lily's tear-stained face, and finally at Susan's glaring eyes. He swallowed hard and looked at the ground. "Sarah, maybe we can just share Brittany's cake? It's a happy occasion for the family." A cold, absolute detachment washed over me. The emotional umbilical cord that had tied me to this man for 34 years simply snapped. I was no longer a disappointed daughter. I was a commanding officer, dealing with a hostile intrusion. Before I could unleash the verbal dressing down of a lifetime, my phone rang. It wasn't a normal ringtone. It was the secure, encrypted line I kept for base emergencies. I pulled it from my pocket. The caller ID flashed a priority red alert from Naval District, Washington. I looked at my sobbing daughter, then at my smug stepsister, who was currently cutting into her engagement cake. "Hold that thought," I said to my family, my voice eerily calm. I swiped to answer the phone and stepped away from the crowd. "Miller," I answered sharply. "Commander." The voice on the other end was Lieutenant O'Connor, my immediate subordinate. "I apologize for interrupting your leave, ma'am, but we have a situation. A high-priority diplomatic intelligence packet just came down from the Pentagon. Admiral Caldwell needs it briefed immediately, and you're the only one cleared on this specific operational framework." "I am currently hosting my daughter's birthday party, Lieutenant," I said, keeping my voice low. "I know, ma'am. The Admiral sends his apologies. But he's not asking you to come in. He said time is of the essence." I frowned, glancing back at my patio where Susan was loudly taking photos of Brittany feeding Greg a piece of cake. "What do you mean he's not asking me to come in?" "Ma'am, Admiral Caldwell is en route to your location. He's 5 minutes out. He has the secure documents with him." My stomach dropped. A 4-star admiral was coming to my house. Today. Right now. In the middle of this absolute circus. "Understood, Lieutenant," I said. "I'll be ready." I hung up the phone. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my floral sundress, feeling the familiar, ironclad discipline of the United States Navy settle over my shoulders. My family thought they had won. They thought they had humiliated the low-level clerk and cemented Brittany's dominance once and for all. They were about to find out exactly who they were messing with. I walked back toward the gazebo, my demeanor completely shifted. The trembling, heartbroken mother was gone. The naval intelligence officer had taken over. I scanned the yard, catching the eye of my best friend and neighbor, Rachel, whose daughter was in Lily's class. "Rachel," I said softly, but with enough authority that she immediately stood up. "Could you please take Lily and the rest of the kids inside to the playroom? Turn on a movie. I need the yard cleared." Rachel, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, didn't ask questions. She gently took Lily's hand, whispering comforting words, and corralled the bewildered second graders into the house. Susan noticed the exodus and let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Sarah! Are you seriously sending the kids inside? You are being completely hysterical over a cake. Brittany's announcement is a big deal, and you're throwing a childish tantrum." Brittany leaned against the patio table, lazily swirling a plastic cup of sparkling cider. "Seriously, you always have to ruin everything. Just let us celebrate. Besides, don't you have some filing to do for your boss? Go pretend to be important." "I strongly suggest you pack your things and leave," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Right now." My father finally stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Sarah, please, don't do this. We're family. Just calm down. We can buy another cake tomorrow." Before I could respond, a low, heavy rumble echoed down my quiet suburban street. It wasn't the sound of a regular neighborhood vehicle. It was the distinct, synchronized hum of high-powered engines. Through the wooden slats of my privacy fence, I saw the flashing of red and blue police lights. Then, the heavy doors of my side gate swung open. 4 heavily armed military police officers in tactical gear stepped into my backyard, quickly securing the perimeter. Their eyes scanned the scattered party decorations, the smashed cake, and finally, my stunned family. Susan dropped her phone. Brittany's jaw fell open, her sparkling cider slipping from her fingers and splashing onto the concrete. Greg instinctively took a step back, looking terrified. Then, walking through the gate with the kind of commanding presence that could silence a hurricane, was Admiral James Caldwell. Admiral Caldwell was a legend in the intelligence community. He was a 4-star admiral, the commander of the United States Fleet Forces Command, and a man who routinely briefed the president. He was dressed in his crisp summer white uniform, the 4 gleaming stars on his collar catching the afternoon sun, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons that told the story of a lifetime of combat and service. He locked eyes with me. I immediately snapped to attention, my spine straight, heels together. Even in my floral sundress, muscle memory took over. But before I could raise my hand to salute him, Admiral Caldwell did the unthinkable. He stopped 3 feet in front of me, stood at perfect attention, and initiated the salute himself. "Commander," Admiral Caldwell's deep, gravelly voice echoed across the silent backyard. "Ma'am, I apologize for the unprecedented intrusion on your personal time." He held the salute, a 4-star admiral initiating a salute to an O5 in civilian clothes, addressing me as ma'am. It was a gesture of profound, almost unheard of respect in the military hierarchy, a silent acknowledgement of the intelligence crisis I had averted the week prior, which was the very reason he was here. I returned the salute crisply, dropping it only after he lowered his. "Admiral." "It is an honor, sir. I understand the situation is urgent." "It is," he nodded grimly. He gestured to a stern-looking aide carrying a locked, lead-lined briefcase. "We need your eyes on these satellite intercepts immediately. You built the predictive model for this region, Sarah. Nobody else can decipher the movement patterns fast enough." I nodded. "My secure home office is ready, sir." I turned slightly, finally allowing myself to look at my family. They looked as though they had been struck by lightning. Susan was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Brittany was trembling, her gaudy engagement ring completely forgotten, her eyes darting between my face and the heavily armed guards standing near her. My father looked physically ill, staring at my posture, at the Admiral, and finally realizing the magnitude of the lie he had allowed his wife to perpetuate. "Commander," Admiral Caldwell said, his sharp eyes following my gaze. He looked at the smashed unicorn cake, the ruined decorations, and the smug sheet cake sitting on the table. His eyes narrowed, instantly assessing the battlefield. "You don't become a 4-star admiral without knowing how to read a room. Is there a problem here?" "No, sir," I replied, my voice steady. Just some uninvited guests who were just leaving? Admiral Caldwell took a slow, deliberate step towards Susan and Brittany. The sheer authority radiating from him made Susan shrink back. "I am aware of Commander Miller's personnel file," the Admiral said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She is one of the most brilliant, highly decorated intelligence officers in the United States Navy. She holds clearances you couldn't even fathom, and she carries the weight of national security on her shoulders. I do not know who you are, but looking at this," he gestured to the smashed cake, "I can deduce you lack honor, discipline, and basic human decency." Susan stammered, completely stripped of her usual venom. We didn't know." She said she was a clerk. "She is a commander," Caldwell corrected sharply, his voice like the crack of a whip. "And she is a mother. Now, the commander has asked you to leave. I suggest you do so before I have my security detail escort you off the premises." The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in her life, Susan had no retort. Brittany was actually crying, not fake, manipulative tears, but genuine tears of humiliation. Greg had already quietly slipped out the side gate, entirely abandoning his new fiancée. "Dad," I said, looking at my father one last time, "don't ever contact me again. You let them break my daughter's heart. We are done." My father reached out a trembling hand. "Sarah, please." "Escort them out," I said to the closest military police officer. "Yes, ma'am," the officer replied, stepping forward and pointing toward the exit. I didn't watch them leave. I turned my back on my father, Susan, and Brittany forever, and led Admiral Caldwell into my house. For the next 2 hours, my home office became a temporary situation room. We went over the encrypted satellite imagery, utilizing the secure network terminal I had installed for emergencies. I cross-referenced the naval movements, identified the anomalies, and provided the Admiral with the tactical assessment he needed to position our strike groups. When we were finished, the Admiral closed the briefcase. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Brilliant work, Sarah," he said, rubbing his eyes. "You just saved thousands of lives. The President will be briefed within the hour." "Just doing my job, sir," I replied. About earlier, he paused, looking at me with a softer, almost grandfatherly expression. "Your daughter, it was her birthday?" "Yes, sir. She turned 7 today." He nodded slowly. "I hate bullies, Commander, whether they wear a uniform or a cocktail dress. You handled yourself with grace." He tapped his earpiece, speaking into his comms. "Chief Peterson, is it secured?" "Yes, Admiral," a voice crackled back from the earpiece. "Good," Caldwell said, standing up. "Walk me out, Commander." I escorted the Admiral back to the yard. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hour glow over the patio. When we stepped outside, I stopped dead in my tracks. The smashed cake was gone. The patio had been entirely cleaned, and standing in the center of the yard was Chief Peterson, holding a massive, pristine, 3-tiered cake. It wasn't a unicorn, it was a beautifully crafted Navy aircraft carrier, complete with tiny fondant planes, and written across the bow in icing was, "Happy 7th birthday, Lily." Rachel had brought Lily and the kids back outside. Lily was staring at the incredible cake, her eyes wide with absolute wonder. Admiral Caldwell walked over to Lily, crouching down to her eye level. "Miss Lily," the 4-star Admiral said softly, "I hear you had a bit of a rough afternoon. My team and I made a quick call to the base culinary specialist. I hope this makes up for it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, gleaming gold Admiral's Challenge coin, an item coveted by military personnel worldwide. He pressed it into Lily's small hand. "Your mother is a hero," he told my daughter, "and you are a very brave young lady." Lily beamed, clutching the gold coin to her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Admiral." The kids cheered. The military police officers smiled, clapping along as we finally sang, "Happy Birthday." My family's attempt to destroy me didn't just fail, it spectacularly backfired. They walked away with nothing but the humiliating realization of their own insignificance, banished from my life forever. Meanwhile, my daughter got to celebrate her 7th birthday surrounded by genuine friends, eating an incredible cake, and holding a gold coin given to her by one of the most powerful men in the military. I am a mother. I am a commander in the United States Navy, and I will never let anyone make me feel small in my own home ever again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't lowering yourself to a bully's level, but letting your own success speak for itself. Standing up to toxic family members is incredibly painful, but protecting your peace and your children is worth every single ounce of courage it takes. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible real-life stories.